Welcome back to another episode of True Crime Untold Cases. I'm your host, Harper Quinn. Tonight, we dive into one of the most haunting chapters in American criminal history, the Atlanta child murders. Between 1979 and 1981, at least 28 African American children and young adults vanished from the streets of Atlanta, their deaths sparking one of the largest manhunts in U.S. history. The investigation would expose deep racial tensions, change how law enforcement handles serial crimes, and lead to the controversial conviction of Wayne Williams, though questions and doubts persist to this day. This is the story of a city gripped by fear, a community fighting for justice, and a case that remains shrouded in mystery 4 decades later. Let's begin. Between the summer of 1979 and the spring of 1981, Atlanta, Georgia was gripped by a terror that would forever change the city. In those 22 months, at least 28 African American children, adolescents, and young adults were murdered in what became known as the Atlanta child murders. The case would become one of the most extensive criminal investigations in Georgia's history, eventually leading to the conviction of Wayne Williams, though controversy and questions still surround the case to this day. It began on July 21, 1979, when 14-year-old Edward Hope Smith and 13-year-old Alfred Evans disappeared just 4 days apart. Edward was last seen on July 21st, and Alfred vanished on July 25th. Their bodies were discovered on July 28th in a wooded area off Niskey Lake Road in southwest Atlanta. Edward had been shot with a .22 caliber handgun, while Alfred appeared to have been strangled. Initially, local law enforcement treated these cases as separate incidents, but this would prove to be the beginning of a horrifying pattern. The next victim was 14-year-old Milton Harvey, who disappeared while on his way to the bank to pay a credit card bill for his mother on September 4, 1979. His body wouldn't be found until November, discovered in an area off Redwine Road. By then, another victim had already been claimed. 9-year-old Yusuf Bell vanished on October 21st, while on an errand to buy Bruton snuff for a neighbor. His body was found on November 8th in an abandoned elementary school building. He had been strangled. The pattern was becoming clear. Young African American boys were disappearing from their neighborhoods, only to be found dead days or weeks later. The victims were often last seen running errands or walking to and from locations close to their homes. This created a climate of fear in Atlanta's African American communities, particularly in the city's public housing projects where many of the victims lived. As 1979 turned into 1980, the killings not only continued but accelerated. 12-year-old Angel Lanier disappeared on March 4, 1980, becoming the first female victim in the series. She was found 6 days later, bound and strangled with an electrical cord. Over the next few months, the bodies of Jeffrey Mathis, Eric Middlebrooks, and Christopher Richardson were discovered, each showing similar patterns of asphyxiation or strangulation. The community's fear turned to outrage as the bodies continued to pile up. Local law enforcement seemed unable to make progress in the investigations, and many in Atlanta's African American community believed the cases weren't receiving the attention they deserved because of the victims' race and economic status. Parents began implementing strict curfews, and children were no longer allowed to play outside or run errands alone. By the summer of 1980, the situation had become so dire that local community members formed the Committee to Stop Children's Murders. Led by Camille Bell, mother of victim Yusuf Bell, and Venus Taylor, mother of victim Angel Lanier, the committee worked to raise awareness about the murders and pressure law enforcement to take more aggressive action. The national media began to take notice. CBS News aired a special report titled "The Atlanta Child Murders," and other major news outlets descended upon the city, The attention finally prompted then-Mayor Maynard Jackson to establish a special task force in July 1980. The task force included members of the Atlanta Police Department, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and eventually the FBI, the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, including agents John Douglas and Roy Hazelwood, was brought in to develop a psychological profile of the killer. They suggested that the perpetrator was likely an African-American male in his late 20s or early 30s, someone who could move freely through the community without arousing suspicion. This profile would later prove crucial in the investigation. Despite the increased law enforcement presence and media attention, the killings continued. In July 1980, 14-year-old Aaron Weich disappeared, followed by the disappearance of 11-year-old Anthony Carter in September. Both boys were found dead within days of their disappearances. The killer seemed to be growing bolder, taking victims despite the heightened police presence and community vigilance. The task force implemented new strategies, including setting up a 24-hour hotline for tips and offering rewards for information leading to the arrest of the killer. They also began using surveillance teams to monitor areas where bodies had been discovered, hoping to catch the killer returning to dump another victim. The investigation was becoming one of the most extensive and expensive in American history, with costs running into millions of dollars. As 1980 drew to a close, the community's fears reached new heights. Parents were escorting their children everywhere, and many families were considering leaving Atlanta altogether. The city that had proudly branded itself as too busy to hate was now paralyzed by fear, and the racial tensions that had long simmered beneath the surface were threatening to boil over. The killer had not only taken the lives of innocent children, but was also tearing at the very fabric of Atlanta's society. The investigation was about to enter its most intense phase, and no one could have predicted the strange turns it would take, or the controversial figure who would eventually be charged with these horrific crimes. The Atlanta child murders had become more than just a series of killings. They were a testament to the city's racial divisions, the power of community activism, and the complexities of criminal investigation in the modern era. The turning point in the investigation came in early 1981, when the task force made a crucial decision to expand their surveillance operations. They began monitoring the city's bridges and waterways, theorizing that the killer might be using these locations to dispose of bodies. This decision was prompted by the discovery of several victims in or near rivers and streams. On January 4, 1981, the body of 15-year-old Luby Gator was found in a wooded area. Gator had last been seen at the Stuart Lakewood shopping center, where he had been selling car deodorizers. His death fit the pattern of asphyxiation that had become grimly familiar to investigators. Just weeks later, 12-year-old Terry Pugh disappeared. His body was discovered on January 23rd along Highway 155 in DeKalb County, bearing signs of strangulation with a cord or rope. The task force was now employing sophisticated surveillance techniques, including the use of wiretaps and stakeouts. They had also begun to notice an interesting pattern. Several witnesses had reported seeing some of the victims in the company of a black man driving a white or light-colored car. This information aligned with the FBI's profile and gave investigators a more specific target to watch for. In February 1981, 13-year-old Patrick Rogers disappeared. His body was found on February 9th in the Chattahoochee River, showing signs of asphyxiation. This discovery marked a significant shift in the killer's disposal pattern as more victims began appearing in Atlanta's waterways. The task force responded by increasing their surveillance of bridges and river access points. March brought more tragedy with the disappearance of 13-year-old Joseph Bell, no relation to earlier victim Yusuf Bell. His body was discovered on April 19th in the South River. The following month, 15-year-old William Barrett went missing, only to be found strangled on May 12th. The killer was now targeting older victims, and the method of disposal had definitively shifted to waterways. The task force had set up multiple surveillance teams around Atlanta's bridges, particularly those crossing the Chattahoochee River. They were using sophisticated equipment, including low-light cameras and night vision devices. Officers were stationed 24 hours a day, watching and waiting for any suspicious activity. Their patience was rewarded in the early morning hours of May 22, 1981. At approximately 2:30 a.m., surveillance teams stationed near the James Jackson Parkway Bridge heard a loud splash. Officers observed a white 1970 Chevrolet station wagon slowly driving across the bridge. The vehicle belonged to Wayne Williams, a 23-year-old freelance photographer and aspiring music producer. When police stopped Williams's car, he claimed he was on his way to an address in Smyrna to audition a female singer named Cheryl Johnson. However, investigators later determined that the address didn't exist, and they couldn't locate anyone by that name. 2 days later, the body of 27-year-old Nathaniel Cater was pulled from the Chattahoochee River, downstream from the bridge where Williams had been stopped. The discovery of Cater's body marked a significant breakthrough in the case. Fiber evidence would later become crucial to the prosecution's case against Williams. The FBI's fiber analysis team, led by Harold Dedman, found that fibers from Williams's home, car, and dog matched those found on several victims' bodies. This included unusual trilobal carpet fibers and rare violet acetate fibers that would become key pieces of evidence. On June 21, 1981, Wayne Williams was arrested and charged with the murders of Nathaniel Cater and Jimmy Ray Payne, another adult victim whose body had been found in the Chattahoochee River. While Williams was never charged with any of the child murders, police attributed many of them to him and considered them closed after his arrest. The trial began on January 6, 1982, with District Attorney Lewis Slayton leading the prosecution. The state's case relied heavily on the fiber evidence, along with witness testimony placing Williams with several victims. The prosecution also presented evidence of Williams's suspicious behavior, including his failed polygraph test and inconsistent statements about his activities on the night he was stopped on the bridge. Williams's defense team, led by Mary Welcome and Tony Axam, attempted to challenge the reliability of the fiber evidence and suggested that the Ku Klux Klan might be responsible for some of the murders. They also questioned why Williams would be charged only with the murders of 2 adults when he was supposedly responsible for killing children. Despite the defense's efforts, the prosecution's case proved compelling. The fiber evidence in particular was devastating. FBI experts testified that the probability of finding the specific combination of fibers from Williams's environment on the victims by chance was extremely low. After 12 hours of deliberation, the jury found Wayne Williams guilty of both murders on February 27, 1982. Following Williams's conviction, he was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. The Atlanta Police Department subsequently announced that they were attributing 22 of the 28 murders to Williams, effectively closing these cases. However, this decision would prove controversial and continue to generate debate for decades to come. The aftermath of the trial left many questions unanswered. Some victims' families expressed skepticism about Williams's guilt, particularly in cases where their children's murders differed significantly from the pattern of the Cater and Payne killings. Catherine Leach, mother of 11-year-old Curtis Walker, was among the most vocal critics, insisting that the true killer of her son remained free. The closure of the cases sparked immediate controversy. Critics pointed out that some of the victims had been shot, while others had been stabbed. Methods inconsistent with the strangulation deaths Williams was convicted of committing. Additionally, some of the young female victims, like Angel Lanier, seemed to fall outside Williams's alleged pattern of targeting young males. In the years following the trial, several alternative theories emerged. Some investigators, including former Georgia Bureau of Investigation Detective Charles Stone, suggested that multiple killers might have been responsible for different subsets of the murders. Stone co-authored a book titled The Atlanta Child Murders: The Night Stalker, in which he presented evidence suggesting that some of the murders might have been committed by organized crime figures involved in a child exploitation ring. Another compelling theory involved possible Ku Klux Klan involvement in some of the murders. In 1991, informant Billy Joe Whitaker came forward claiming he had information about Klan members bragging about killing black children. This led to a brief reopening of investigation into possible Klan connections, but authorities ultimately found insufficient evidence to pursue these leads. The fiber evidence that had been so crucial to Williams's conviction also came under scrutiny. Advanced forensic scientists began questioning the statistical significance of the fiber matches, arguing that the prosecution had overstated their uniqueness. Dr. Harold Dedman's testimony about the rarity of the carpet fibers was particularly challenged, with some experts suggesting that similar fibers could have been found in thousands of Atlanta homes. Wayne Williams has maintained his innocence throughout his incarceration. In numerous interviews and appeals, he has consistently denied any involvement in the murders. His lawyers have filed multiple appeals, citing new forensic techniques that could potentially re-examine the fiber evidence using more modern methods. In 2019, nearly 40 years after the murders began, Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms and Police Chief Erica Shields announced that the city would re-examine evidence from the child murders using modern DNA testing technology. This decision came after years of pressure from victims' families and civil rights activists who believed that crucial questions remained unanswered. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation partnered with Atlanta police to review evidence from the cases, including hair samples, bloodstains, and clothing fibers. While some evidence had degraded over time, advances in DNA technology offered hope that new information might emerge. The review focused particularly on cases where the evidence gathering and storage methods might have preserved biological materials suitable for modern testing. The reopening of the investigation brought renewed attention to the profound impact these crimes had on Atlanta's African American community. Many residents who were children during the murder spree spoke about the lasting trauma of that period. The murders had effectively ended their innocence, introducing them to harsh realities about race, class, and justice in America. The case also highlighted the evolution of forensic science and criminal investigation techniques. The Atlanta child murders investigation was one of the first to use many modern police procedures, including psychological profiling and large-scale fiber analysis. The surveillance operation that led to Williams's arrest was unprecedented in its scope and sophistication for that time. The social and political ramifications of the cases continue to resonate. The murders exposed deep-seated racial tensions in Atlanta and raised questions about how law enforcement responds to crimes against minority communities. The formation of the Committee to Stop Children's Murders demonstrated the power of community activism and the importance of grassroots organizing in demanding justice. Today, the Atlanta child murders remain a complex and controversial chapter in American criminal justice history. While Wayne Williams sits in prison, questions persist about whether he was responsible for all the murders attributed to him, or if other killers escaped justice. The case serves as a sobering reminder of the limitations of forensic science, the complexity of criminal investigations, and the lasting impact of unsolved questions on communities affected by violence. The legacy of these murders extends beyond the criminal justice system. They changed how Atlanta viewed itself and how the rest of the country viewed Atlanta. The city that had promoted itself as a beacon of racial progress was forced to confront its own divisions and inequities. The murders also changed how law enforcement approaches cases involving missing and murdered children, particularly those from minority communities. The reopening of the investigation in 2019 brought new hope to many families, but it also resurfaced painful memories and long-standing grievances. The Atlanta Police Department, working with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, began the painstaking process of reviewing physical evidence that had been stored for nearly 4 decades. This included items from both the cases officially attributed to Wayne Williams and those that remained officially unsolved. One of the most significant aspects of the new investigation was the focus on DNA testing, a technology that hadn't existed during the original investigation. In particular, investigators were interested in examining DNA evidence from the victim's clothing and other items that might have preserved genetic material from their attacker or attackers. However, the challenges were substantial. Many evidence items had degraded over time, and storage methods from the 1980s weren't designed with DNA preservation in mind. The review also brought attention to several cases that had received less scrutiny during the original investigation. For instance, the murder of 15-year-old LaTonya Wilson, who was abducted from her home in June 1980, had distinct characteristics that set it apart from the pattern attributed to Wayne Williams. Her case, along with several others, raised questions about whether all the murders were truly connected. Former DeKalb County Police Chief Lewis Graham, who had been involved in the original investigation, had long maintained that some of the cases attributed to Williams deserved separate consideration. Before his death in 2015, Graham had reopened 5 of the cases in DeKalb County, believing that evidence pointed to other potential suspects. His work, though ultimately inconclusive, helped lay the groundwork for the 2019 review. The new investigation also benefited from advanced analytical tools that weren't available in the 1980s. Investigators could now use sophisticated database systems to cross-reference criminal patterns, geographic profiling software to analyze disposal sites, and advanced forensic techniques to examine trace evidence. These tools allowed them to look at the cases from new angles and potentially identify patterns that were missed in the original investigation. One particularly interesting aspect of the review involved the examination of fiber evidence using modern microscopy and analytical techniques. The original conviction had relied heavily on fiber analysis, but modern forensic scientists now had access to more sophisticated tools for examining and comparing fibers. This included scanning electron microscopy and spectral analysis that could provide more detailed information about fiber composition and origin. The review also focused on the geographical patterns of the murders. Using modern mapping technology, investigators could create detailed visualizations of victim disappearance sites, body disposal locations, and Wayne Williams's known movements during the period of the murders. This analysis revealed interesting patterns that both supported and questioned aspects of the original investigation's conclusions. Community involvement remained crucial during the review process. Many of the original activists who had formed the Committee to Stop Children's Murders had passed away, but their children and grandchildren continued their work. They organized community meetings, maintained pressure on law enforcement, and worked to ensure that the victims' stories weren't forgotten. The investigation also examined previously overlooked connections between some of the victims. For instance, several of the victims had been known to frequent the same recreation centers or had mutual acquaintances. While these connections had been noted in the original investigation, modern social network analysis tools allowed investigators to map these relationships more comprehensively. One of the most challenging aspects of the review was dealing with witnesses' memories after so many years. Many key witnesses had died, while others' recollections had faded or become influenced by media coverage and public discussion of the cases. However, some witnesses came forward with new information, saying they had been too afraid to speak during the original investigation. The review also examined the broader context of Atlanta in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Investigators looked at other crimes from the period, examining possible connections that might have been overlooked. This included looking at similar crimes in other southeastern cities and examining possible links to organized crime or child exploitation rings that were operating during that period. As the investigation continued, it became clear that some questions might never be fully answered. The passage of time, the degradation of evidence, and the death of key witnesses had created obstacles that even modern technology couldn't overcome. However, the review process itself served an important purpose. It demonstrated to the community that their concerns were being taken seriously and that the pursuit of truth hadn't been abandoned. The Atlanta child murders case remains one of the most complex and controversial investigations in American criminal history. While Wayne Williams continues to serve his life sentences, questions persist about whether justice was fully served. The case serves as both a cautionary tale about the limitations of forensic science and criminal investigation, and a reminder of the importance of continuing to seek truth and justice even decades after crimes occur. The impact of these murders on Atlanta's African American community cannot be overstated. An entire generation grew up in the shadow of these crimes, their childhoods marked by fear and restrictions that their white counterparts didn't experience. The case became a lens through which issues of race, class, and justice in America could be examined, and these discussions continue to resonate today. The 2019 investigation also led to renewed interest in documenting the personal stories of those affected by the murders. Families who had remained silent for years began sharing their experiences, providing new perspectives on how the crimes and their aftermath had shaped their lives. These testimonies painted a vivid picture of a community forever changed by tragedy. Many survivors of that era, who were children during the murder spree, came forward to share their stories of growing up in Atlanta during those terrifying years. They described the strict curfews, the buddy systems for walking to school, and the constant fear that gripped their neighborhoods. One survivor, who wished to remain anonymous, recalled how her mother would pin her phone number inside her clothes every day just in case something happened. The case has also become an important subject of study for criminal justice reform advocates. They point to the Atlanta child murders as an example of how socioeconomic status and race can influence the response to crimes against children. The initial slow response to the disappearances, they argue, reflects a broader pattern of disparate treatment in the criminal justice system. In 2021, the Atlanta Police Department announced the creation of a permanent memorial to honor the victims. The memorial, placed in Atlanta's Oakland Cemetery, lists the names of all the victims and serves as a reminder of this dark chapter in the city's history. Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms emphasized that the memorial was not just about remembering the victims, but about acknowledging the city's responsibility to protect all its children, regardless of race or economic status. The continuing investigation has also sparked important discussions about cold case investigations and the preservation of evidence. Many law enforcement agencies have revised their evidence storage protocols based on lessons learned from the Atlanta cases. The importance of maintaining evidence in a way that preserves DNA and other biological materials for future testing has become a standard practice in modern criminal investigations. As of 2023, Wayne Williams remains in custody at Telfair State Prison, maintaining his innocence. His case has been reviewed multiple times by the Georgia Supreme Court, but his convictions have been upheld. The investigation into the unsolved cases continues, with investigators using new technologies and methodologies as they become available. The Atlanta child murders case remains a powerful reminder of how a series of crimes can fundamentally alter a city's identity and expose deep-seated societal issues. It demonstrates the importance of community activism, the evolution of forensic science, and the ongoing need for justice system reform. Most importantly, it stands as a testament to the resilience of a community that refused to let these crimes be forgotten and continues to seek answers decades later. The case has also influenced how law enforcement agencies across the country handle missing children cases, particularly those involving minority communities. Many departments have implemented protocols specifically designed to address potential serial crimes against children, with emphasis on rapid response and community engagement. As Atlanta continues to grow and change, the memory of these murders remains an important part of the city's consciousness. The case serves as both a warning about the devastating impact of violence on communities and a call to action for continued vigilance in protecting society's most vulnerable members. The search for truth in the Atlanta child murders case may never be fully resolved, but its impact on criminal justice, community activism, and social justice reform continues to resonate well into the 21st century.